Hi, this is Dr. Rashawn Ray, and this is my daily thought. I just can't imagine. Jack, so sorry that you have to grow up without a father. So sorry this world we live in has taken him from you too soon. Just God bless you and your family. As I watched you yesterday laying over your father's casket, it was just heartbreaking. And this morning, as I finished praying for Jack and his family and the rest of the police officers, I'm curious who also, like me, said a prayer for the 4-year-old girl who was consoling her mother as she watched Philando Castile murdered in the front seat of the car. I'm curious who empathized with and prayed for Alton Sterling's son when he gave his press conference on how much he's going to miss his dad. I prayed for all three. Did you? If you didn't, so you're part of the problem. Your lack of empathy seeps into our social interactions and maintains the racial inequality that we see. For most of you, you don't want things to change. You want things to go back to when they were supposedly great, when you didn't have to think about this, when you didn't have to acknowledge this, when you didn't have to recognize this, when you didn't have to recognize our black humanity as equal. You then, ma'am or sir, are the American problem. I want to focus on a couple other topics this morning. First is this narrative that, and it's just a societal problem. It's not a cop issue. Is this issue that if you do your job and you do it pretty well, you're pretty average, that you some kind of way should get some kind of special recognition for that, right? I think we get paid, and of course, I think like myself, like most people, as I've said before, I have 3 relatives who are former police officers who have retired, but we act like some kind of way that everybody should get a trophy for just simply doing their job, right? Like I coached my kids' Little League baseball team this year, and there were 2 kids, one of which, who I won't name, were playing dirt the whole time. They wouldn't play in the game. And then you had like a group of 4 other kids who progressed really well. And then you had another group of kids who were really, really good. And what's interesting about that is everybody at the end of the season got a trophy. I don't know why the kids in playing in the dirt should have got the trophy, right? I don't even know why the kids should have got the same trophy. But this is the society that we live in. People think you should get something, whether or not you do something special or not. So, thank you. When I'm not worried that I may actually get stopped or questioned for something I didn't do, the way that I kind of think about it is when I'm walking around, when I'm doing these sort of things, it's one of those things where you think about what the consequences might be for doing human-like movements. So one of the things that I noticed as well, I watched a video, really good video, of one of the Dallas protesters who was marching and protesting in peace before it turned deadly. And a few things in that video stood out to me. First, the assumption that Black Lives Matter protesters are setting us back. He actually said it best. He said, no, not just black people. We being humans just set ourselves back. What I interpreted that to mean is we are all complicit in this until equality is unconditional and is unconditionally free for everyone. Not just some people, but everyone. Second, he also added in social class, which I think is a major overlooked factor that I will continue to address, the intersections between race and social class that we don't necessarily can put together. It's difficult for people to think about binaries. It's really difficult for people to think about intersections, and I'll try to break some of that down. So he stated that some white cops helped him get clean when he was on drugs. And it's nice to see this level of empathy shown for people with addiction when in the 1990s, people were being locked away for a Rice Krispie sized crack rock, while today we want to decriminalize drug addiction because heroin and opiates are affecting mostly white communities. Additionally, he stated that police officers actually treat him worse now when he wears a suit than he did when he was a drug addict. See, this is one of the crucial points that people are missing. Why are black professionals treated like criminals? We don't live in high poverty areas. We don't commit crime. So tell me why we are criminalized and solely responsible for crimes in communities we don't live in. I'm also curious why people who live in those communities, which are those types of communities are the communities I come from, people who are living there who overwhelmingly don't commit crime are some kind of way responsible for the crime that other people are committing. When In fact, the thing that we don't realize is that most crime is intraracial. About 94% of all crime committed by blacks is committed by other blacks. Likewise, 86% of all crime committed by whites is committed by other whites. We some kind of way don't frame that as white on white crime. In some kind of way, white people aren't responsible for other white people committing crime, when some kind of way black people are supposedly responsible for. Oh yeah, but right. That's because all black people are the same, right? So black professionals actually do have this Du Boisian talented 10th responsibility that I've written and published on for about a decade. And that's one of the burdens that blackness carries that whites don't, that's difficult for them to actually understand and realize. Third, the Dallas peaceful protester mentioned how Dallas does not have a police brutality problem per se. Relatively compared to other large cities over the past years, this is definitely true. And the reason why Dallas has better relations is because they hired a police chief and elected a mayor who was able to implement policy changes to improve community policing, actively remove quote unquote bad apples, and hire cops more in line with equitable goals. See, we have to be clear about why these changes occurred. In the late 2000s, Dallas had a horrible record on police brutality. Now, due to policy changes, things are much better, and it is now one of the most desirable cities for blacks and other individuals living in the United States. And so this is why the tragedy in Dallas is so unfortunate, given all the progress that they've made. I want to quickly talk about these so-called bad apples. What people don't realize about bad apples, if you have like a bag of fruit, is that bad apples actually spoil and they spread to the good apples. And they end up affecting the entire bunch unless these bad apples are actually removed. And what's interesting is not just removed, but systematically removed by policies that allow law enforcement administrators to take swift actions on complaints of police misconduct and racism. Now, as it relates to the Dallas police chief, he made a statement recently and said, if you're upset about what's happening in your city, in the country, well, we're taking applications, join us. Definitely true. And that's part of his personal biography that people have to understand. He actually had a son who was killed by a police officer, and his son actually killed a police officer. And obviously, as you've probably noticed, the police chief in Dallas is black. And so, as I've said before, black people don't hate white people. Black people hate oppression, right? Black people don't hate cops. Black people hate police brutality. We have to be very clear about what the problems are and what we're trying to solve. Finally, the man in the video was talking about how our society needs to value lives over the economy. Well, as cautiously optimistic as I seem to be on various topics, unfortunately, since before the founding of the United States, the exploitation of the marginalized in the pursuit of economic gains have always been here. Unfortunately, it's in our national DNA. Maybe it will change one day, but I'm not too optimistic on this point. 2 more points. First, as I've said before, conversations matter. If you are only talking about what happens on social media or in the news to people who look like you or have your same viewpoints, you're not helping. Do better. Conversations matter, and uncomfortable conversations with mutual respect matter even more. This is one of the things that happens with one of my former neighbors, who I'm sad that they've moved away, Joe Rulewich, who we've had several of these difficult conversations. As he was my neighbor living across the street from us. They've now moved to Missouri. His wife is in law enforcement. I pray regularly for their safety as they travel to and fro, as I do for other individuals I know and everyone else as well. And what's important is that most of the time, every time I interact with Joe, I leave changed. I hope he leaves changed from the social interactions that we have, and that we actually grow from the seeds planted among us and actually give life to be watered by others and our newfound knowledge, as we are continuously polluted with stereotypical information from mass media. These conversations give us a new perspective that is important to see other viewpoints, and I think that's extremely important. And part of me mentioning Joe is that this video that I'm mentioning, he sent it to me, and it was so loaded with great information, and it was shown on the news live, that I don't think people could really unpack it. So I wanted to have time to really think through and talk about some of these issues. Finally, I recently penned an op-ed with Dr. Robert Vargas, who is a professor at the University of Notre Dame. Had a recent book come out on crime in Chicago, a great book. And you can check out our op-ed on Public Radio International. You can search PRI, it'll pop up. And what we talked about is a nation at war with itself. And part of what we are trying to do is one thing that I noticed that's happening with the academy, with academics, is the hoarding of knowledge. Open access is a huge problem. I won't name names, but a group of us scholars put together a race and policing Dropbox. And all of a sudden it came under attack, legal attack, because supposedly we were violating potentially some copyright laws that no one can actually show us. And what's interesting is that that's a problem, right? And so we have a problem actually with learning something new, with getting new information. And as my colleague, Dr. Philip Cohen, who has an extremely popular blog called Family Unequal, stated, class is in session even though it's the summertime. And even though some of us have graduated high school or college and got graduate degrees, we can still continue to learn. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do. And someone has asked me, how long is this sustainable? You know, I'm unsure. But I do know that basically every day I listen to the news and I see stuff on social media and I think, wow, that runs counter to 20 years of consistent empirical research. And they didn't mention any of it. And that's a problem. Personally, the Philando Castile murder did something to me. I listened to that video and I watched it. And I know for some people, they simply can't watch it, particularly the extended version. If you can, I recommend you do so. Because when I watched it, what I saw was a 4-year-old having to console her mother as she watched her mother pray and cry to God after witnessing her boyfriend being shot to death and murdered. And then she watched her mother not being able to console her boyfriend as he took his last breath because they were sitting in the back seat of a police car, not being charged with anything, not being criminals. And as I thought about that, I thought about having a 4-year-old, and I thought about what that would be like. And unfortunately, Philando Castile, as I thought about the similarities between the both of us, I thought, unfortunately, I need to up my insurance policy. First thing I thought. But more importantly, what I thought is that besides, even teaching, depending on how large the classes I teach each year, hundreds of undergraduates and graduate students that I encounter yearly, or even the presentations that I'm fortunate to travel to give, or even the research documents that I publish, I felt that the work that academics do need to be shared with the world and not hoarded in the ivory tower and be expensive. And that's what's happening now. So we actually need a reconstruction of academic publishing, right? One of the things that Dr. Vargas and I talked about in that piece is that the United States is in a new era where we need a new era of reconstruction, and not necessarily reconstruction as Dr. Gregory Parks at Wake Forest talks about, where we hit the nadir and progress is stalled and we have Plessy versus Ferguson and we have separate and unequal and Jim Crow. No, instead we need a reconstruction to reconstruct what's going to happen for the 21st century. And part of that reconstruction, I think, has to do with the way that academic information is being hoarded in the ivory tower and not being shared with everyone. I mean, it actually harkens back to when, say, religious documents such as the Bible was written in Latin, and the only people who can interpret it were priests and people who had went to school for a very, very long time. That's essentially what we're doing, right? And we are essentially starving the masses of the information that we produce. And we need to do better, whether that's doing vlogs like this, whether that's doing blogs like Family Unequal, whether that's doing things like trying to create quick licks like context, whether that's actually taking our articles and creating op-eds and blogs and creating a repository where people can get that information. Then we're not copywriting because it's essentially a different document. So there are several things that we can actually do to deal with these particular issues. So those are my daily thoughts for today. I hope that they've been useful. One last point quickly I want to address is that I think I've heard one assumption is that, potentially since I got tenure that I decided to do this, that, that wasn't the case at all. This had to do with watching a video. I felt like I was doing some things that the work that I was supposed to be doing, the empirical objective work I was supposed to be doing. But when I watched that video and saw that little girl have to say that to her mother as they could not console their loved one, I mean, that just did something to me in a very different way. And if it doesn't do something to you when you see that, when seeing a son lean over his father's casket, if that doesn't do something to you either, then again, you are part of the problem. You are not making this better. Conversations matter. This is my daily thought.